Mailing May. True story. It all started when Ma and Pa promised I could stay a spell with Grandma Mary, who lived 1,000,000 miles away through the rough old Idaho mountains. But when I asked Ma if it was time to go, she just shook her head and sighed real deep. So I tried asking Pa. "No money," said Pa. "Train tickets cost $1.55, May. I work all day to make that much. Maybe next year." But I just couldn't wait a whole year, so the next morning when Ma bundled me in my heavy winter coat and sent me out to play in the snow, I made a beeline for Alexander's department store. Mr. Alexander called his hello from atop the ladder. "I need a job," I said. "I need money for the train." Mr. Alexander smiled as he stepped down to the floor. "A job, is it? I wish I could hire you, May, but all the jobs around here are for grown-ups, like counting money and lifting heavy cartons." I must have looked mighty sad because Mr. Alexander reached for a jar of peppermint sticks. The sweet wintry taste didn't do much to cheer me as I slogged my way home. Things only got worse when Pa came back from work that night. He and Ma commenced to whispering and peeking at me off and on. Then they made me go to bed awful early, which I did not like at all. Next morning, Ma shook me awake while it was still real dark. I was puzzled to see Pa's little traveling bag packed and standing by the door. When I asked where he was going, Ma only smiled and said, "Eat your breakfast." Just then, someone knocked on our front door. Pa opened up to Ma's cousin Leonard. "Come along, May," Pa said, grabbing the suitcase as Ma helped me with my coat. We were going to the post office with Leonard. He held up his hand as I opened my mouth. "No questions," Pa said with a wink. Ma hugged and kissed me before Pa took my hand and led me out into the dark winter air. Before long, I stood in the funny smells of the Grangeville post office. Glue and canvas bags and oiled wooden floors. Meanwhile, Pa marched right up to Postmaster Perkins and said, Sam, you got some new rules for mailing packages. I know boxes can weigh up to 50 pounds nowadays, but what sorts of things can you send?" Mr. Perkins looked at Pa real strange-like and asked, "What you got in mind, John?" "It's May," said Pa. "We'd like to mail her to Lewiston. Leonard here mans the mail car on the train, as you well know. He can take good care of our package." "Sure thing, Sam," said Leonard. I was flabbergasted by Pa, and so was Mr. Perkins. "Mailing May," he mumbled, shaking his head. Let's see. The postal code says not to mail lizards or insects or anything smelly. Mr. Perkins looked over at me, looked over his glasses, and then sniffed. "I guess you passed the smell test." "But what about girls?" I asked. "Can you mail me?" "Well, the rule book says nothing about children, but it is permissible to mail baby chicks." Mr. Perkins smiled. "Let's find out exactly how much you and your valise weigh." I scrambled up onto the big scale, and Pa set his traveling bag next to me. "48 pounds and 8 ounces. Biggest baby chick on record." Mr. Perkins ran a finger down the chart hanging near the scale and turned to Pa. "To mail May from Grangeville to Lewiston will cost 53 cents. "Well, Leonard, looks like you'll be in charge of some poultry on this mail run." Before I knew it, Mr. Perkins had glued 53 cents worth of stamps on the back of my coat, along with a label. Pa hugged me and told me to be good to Grandma Mary. Then he was gone, and there I was, a package, sitting in the post office. Before long, Leonard carted me and the rest of the mail to the train station. The big black steam engine was already waiting, hissing and snorting like a boar hog. The sight made me go all tingly, seeing as I'd never ridden on a train before. After Leonard loaded the mail bags and a few other packages, he called out, "Time to go, May." Then he helped me up the steel steps. At exactly 7 o'clock, the train chugged away from home and headed down the mountain. I felt as adventuresome as Daniel Boone. The inside of the mail car was like a little post office, and Leonard got busy right away sorting mail to be dropped off at towns along the way. I curled up nearby the stove to keep warm and watched. Whenever Leonard had a free minute, he'd take me to the door for a look. My, oh my, what sights there were to see. Why, we hung on the edge of the mountainsides and crawled through tunnels. We crossed deep valleys on top of tall, spidery trestles that Leonard called steel on stilts. Then long about Lapwai Canyon, where the train tracks twist back and forth down the mountain, I began to feel somewhat less adventuresome. Instead, I was feeling dizzy and weak in the stomach. I was about to run to get some fresh air when I heard an angry voice at the door. "Leonard," yelled a man in uniform, "that girl better have a ticket or money to buy one." It was Mr. Harry Morris, the train's conductor. I hid behind Leonard as he explained that I was a package, not a passenger. Then he showed Mr. Morris the stamps on my coat. That cranky old conductor slapped his knee and laughed out loud. "I've seen everything now," said Mr. Morris, wiping his eyes. Well, Mr. Morris plumb scared the dizziness right out of me. Even my stomach seemed better, and I started feeling hungry. Leonard said lunch would be at Grandma Mary's. The train made a few more stops at towns like Sweetwater and Joseph before we pulled into the Lewiston Railroad station. Since this was the end of the line, Leonard had time to be my mail carrier, and we headed for Grandma Mary's place. The second I laid eyes on Grandma Mary, I felt downright warm inside. Ma and Pa had kept their promise after all, with a little help from the U.S. Post Office.